Hi, I'm Will Bruin, and I was just recognized as a Seattle Sounders legend. Now I get to do voice reads for the Sounder at Heart podcast network.
Here we go. Come on! Hey, O'Shan! Let's go!
The Seattle Sounders have done it! MLS Cup winners!
Here comes Rui Diaz through the middle to crown it for Seattle!
The Sounders rule the region!
Seattle Sounders is campeón!
Vega! Ooch of a gooch!
All creatures great and small!
De la Vega! ¡No me pongo de pie! ¡De rodillas!
You know, what was the thought process in terms of who you decided to use and who you didn't?
Ever since Sounder at Heart wrote a commentary that we didn't take Old Cup seriously.
This episode of Nos Arietes is sponsored by Full Pull Wines, a Seattle-based wine retailer and proud sponsor of Nos Arietes since 2011. Full Pull was founded in 2009, is based in Seattle, and is owned and operated by longtime Sounders supporters. They offer the best boutique wines of the world to members of their mailing list, with special focus on their home, the Pacific Northwest. Welcome back to another episode of Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart podcast network. I am Jeremiah Shan. It is Friday. We aren't at Long Acres this time. This time we're doing it remote. The Sounders are off today because they're playing on Monday. But I am joined by Niko Moreno. Welcome back, Niko.
Hey, what's going on, Jeremiah? Today with a little remote work, but you know we had to, as always, get ready for this show. Make sure that the people get their information. I have heard some really good things. I was actually just at Starfire just recently. Man, I'm awful with last names, but Steven, shout to him. He says he does not miss a What We Learned This Week episode. He listens to every Friday. Always looks for him. So he was kind enough to buy me a coffee. Out of sympathy, I will say, and I told him that I was fine. We don't need to talk about why he thought I was in some sort of emotional crisis because of the presser situation with Brian. I told him that everything's fine, but he was kind enough to buy me a coffee. So he talked about it. He laughed. We talked about it. So shout out to Steven. I'm sorry I forget your last name, but good guy. So he listens to the show. That's why we do it, is for whoever it is that enjoys our content. And of course everybody follows Jo, but I'm always humble when people say hello.
I don't know. I will say the last couple times I've walked around Lumen with Noah, I'm getting like, I can't believe everyone recognizes this guy. He's starting to take my bit.
Oh yeah, Noah's a big deal. He does all the fashion stuff. He's over there with the cool glasses and the cool haircut. Yeah, no, he definitely is out there.
I know. Well, we may as well talk about this. I know you addressed it on Lobbing Scorchers, but I think maybe I have a different perspective on it that I think you probably share with the presser with Brian, where I think it's maybe important to share with people. We don't take this stuff personally. Like, Brian is allowed to react however he reacts. You had a nice conversation with him after. We don't have to get into the particulars of that, but I think it's important to know that we don't tend to take we don't take that stuff personally, and whether or not like Brian was whatever he was in the right or not, that's not the point. It's that he reacted, and I think in the end you guys came to a better understanding either way of the point of the question.
Yes, absolutely. And that is actually, it's a great thing that you bring it up, because you're right. I mean, that people need to know that it's obviously something that most journalists should be ready for. And, I've been doing this for enough time where I've got into it with Bruce Arena, responded oddly, and Caleb Porter. And of course, Robbie Keane had a big one on me one time. Obviously, Brian Smetzer. I've heard both comments. I've heard some comments that are negative, and that's totally fine. People, if you don't like my questions or you think that I'm not articulate enough or that I shouldn't be doing this job, then that's totally fine. And if you have reached out and said, I really understand, and I hope that Brian has apologized, there's no apology needed on either side, right? I totally understand where he was coming from. I'd hope that he'd understand where I was coming from. So we had a good conversation, no apologies needed, but just finding some particulars and understanding of what it is that we do. So yeah, it definitely was one of those things where I can absolutely understand where I could have done better in my phrasing and certain things. And I kind of went over that in Lob and Scorcher. Sometimes when we try really hard, or at least at that particular time, I was trying really hard to be empathetic of the situation. I think I made it worse by convoluting the question a little bit. But no, it obviously is something that we don't take personally, and I'm gonna continue to approach the media aspect of what I do and the journalistic part of the work that I do in the exact same way, which is I'm going to be real. I don't want to be a bit of, I don't want to be like the anti, sounder. I don't want to be the pro sounder guy. I just want to be real and ask the questions that I think need to be asked. And that's what's going to continue to happen.
And I think one of the things that's important to remember is that, we both take our jobs seriously, and it's not our job to just ask questions that people want to be asked. Like sometimes we have to ask questions that are awkward. And sometimes in your case, the whole point of your question was so that give Brian the opportunity to explain to fans why he thought it was important to play Pedro, which you and I beforehand both knew was going to happen and we supported happening. So whether or not we were second guessing him is secondary, but we weren't even second guessing him. And the point is that we sometimes have to ask questions that they don't want to get into, because that's part of what our job is to get information. If it was just a situation where we were expected to just be spokespeople for the organization, they wouldn't need us. They could just put out YouTube videos and they can have their own staff ask the questions. But the whole thing that we bring is that we are at times having to bring up stuff that they don't want to talk about, and sometimes they don't like it, and that's okay. And we don't have to. We don't take that personally, and hopefully they don't either. And that's how this whole thing works.
Yeah, and a lot of times, people tend to not understand why we ask that question. I mean, I wanted Brian to have a statement on the reasoning of him playing. I wasn't trying to question it, as you just mentioned. Both you and I knew the reason, but I felt a little bit odd when, even prior to the presser, I'm the one kind of saying, well, these are the reasons why Pedro was in there and why it was worth him playing this, what you guys are calling a mini-league game or a low-stake game. And I just wanted him to have a statement. So we just got to ask the question so there is an on-record response to a certain question. If it might sound redundant or too obvious, then it doesn't matter. We cannot assume, and I learned that from you, Jeremiah, we cannot assume what that answer is going to be. He has to be able to have it on record for multiple purposes. So that's kind of why you ask it. But to go back to the whole point of this is that obviously we'll turn the page. I'm going to continue to be me, the journalist, and Brian's going to continue to be Brian. Brian is not going to change his ways at all. He's always going to respond a certain way, and he's always going to, take some things good, some things bad. He's a human being, just plain and normal. And then when it comes to, obviously, my learning experience, it will be clearly maybe slowing it down a little bit more, being a little bit more clear, and getting those questions asked the right way.
And in case people are totally confused and they have no idea what I'm talking about, I would just refer you to the post-game press conference from the New York City FC match. Basically, Niko asked Brian why he felt it was important for Pedro to play in the game. Pedro, of course, ended up getting hurt. And And we don't need to get into anything beyond there, but that's the premise for what we're talking about. If you really are interested in the particulars, I would urge you to go watch the video and then whatever. I guess I could have, if I was good at my job, I would have prefaced this entire conversation with that information, but now you have it. So we can move on. So this has been an interesting week in training, in part because it's not a normal schedule. I actually wasn't there yesterday. Brian, somewhat surprisingly, talked to the media after training on Thursday. He doesn't usually talk on Thursday unless there's unless they're leaving town on Friday or on Thursday even. But the Sounders are actually going to be here until Sunday, so I figured he would just talk on Sunday. But maybe this made more sense for whatever reason. But we did learn a few things, and I'll let you get into that. But it sounds like Alex Roldan has been in and out of training this week because this hip issue that he first experienced a few weeks ago hasn't entirely gone away. On the positive side, Yeimar is 100% into practice. I actually wouldn't be surprised at this point if he was going to play 90 minutes. What's your take on sort of the various injury levels that the Sounders are dealing with right now?
Yes, I think that reading in between the lines, and I've been there right at the start of practice and been very vigilant of Alex Roldan's body language and seeing where he's at. And for all accounts, I think that he's also a player that is ready to start, that he definitely is dealing with something and he's working his way through it. So he has been, I would call him a partial participant in practice. He's done some things off to the side. He's joined in both scrimmages and minimized drills when it comes to the 7v7s or 6v6 and things that they do, particularly for on the ball type of workout. So I think that he is, and knowing Alex Roldan, a guy that is more than willing to put his body on the line. He looks fit enough to start this game. There's probably going to be a close eye on him throughout the game. And then Yeimar Gomez Andrade is 100% on. He looks fit for 90. He without a doubt is a guy that even for the New York City game looked like he was available for that one. But I think that the coaching staff did a good job at holding him back in that one and saying, hey, you're going to get a whole week of rest more, be able to get that hamstring more comfortable. He did some works on the side to kind of assess the injuries. Kind of what I get out of it is some sprints, some high knee workout and things like that, just to kind of exactly testing the injury, making sure that he was fine. And it looks like he passed with flying colors. So for as much as I know so far, and hearing Brian Spencer say he's 100%, I think that he's ready for 90. And Alex, I think he's also good enough to be available, even to start. But my guess is that they're going to be a close eye on him, just in case there is more pain or discomfort in that hip area.
And that's also what we found out why he came out early on Saturday, which I guess was around the 70th minute or so, if I remember correctly. And he was replaced by Kalani Kosarienzi. And this is a situation where it's really nice to have a player like Kosarienzi who has all these minutes. They even have, Reed Baker Whiting will be available as well. This is actually, the Pedro de la Vega injury aside, this is probably the healthiest the Sounders have been all season, which frankly is exactly the situation you want to be in going into the playoffs. And it's an interesting thing because what the New York City match showed us was that the Sounders weren't going all in on that game. And I think that that's understandable. They held back Yeimar, they held back Christian, they held back Obed, who all just were coming off of heavy, or Christian and Obed were coming off heavy minutes in international duty. But they did play Pedro, which I think illustrates two things. One, they were very cognizant of wanting to get that attacking quartet together, because that the quartet of Pedro, Jesus, Albert, and Jordan have barely played together at all. And if they feel like that's their best attacking group, they needed to get them on the field together. But I think it also shows that medically he was fully cleared to play. Like there was no question that whether the tendonitis, like I've heard some speculation that the tendonitis was related to this injury. And, I'm not a medical expert, but I've never heard, I don't know what those two things would have to do with one another. I certainly don't think the tendonitis was actually some sort of undiagnosed fracture in his knee.
That is correct. And I've actually reached out to, I don't know if he gives me permission. So a doctor of a specific Colombian club that has worked on several MLS players' rehab. And he mentioned the exact same thing, that it is not correlated unless that tendonitis has been misdiagnosed, which for all accounts, that's not.
He's been
what happened here.
Been monitoring it for a long time.
Exactly. I think they've been pretty. Just said monitoring. I think they've been keeping a pretty close watch on that knee to misdiagnose anything. So yeah, obviously something that happens. That's why I mentioned that. I think it's unfair to make Brian responsible for playing the player in that particular time, regardless of what anyone may say about the field conditions or the low stakes of the game. I think that if that was going to happen, it would have happened at any time. And I said this on Looming Scorchers on Monday. And the reality is that right now you're able to plan for it. Right now you're able to plan for the playoffs without Pedro de la Vega. Had it happened during game 1 or game 2 of a Minnesota game, I think would have been more alarming, would have been a lot worse, because you are unable to really prepare for that situation. So right now you're able to do it. Obviously our thoughts are completely with Pedro de la Vega. I'm hearing that he is doing much better than he was initially mentally, right? I mean, this is a guy that was distraught at the entire thing. We talked to Jordan. Jordan's been texted him. He's told him that he's going to come back stronger than ever. Obed has reached out to him. JP has, the whole team is kind of surrounding Pedro de la Vega during this difficult time. And I think that's important because, as you heard everyone say, Pedro de la Vega is just a nice guy, like a really sweet, like I don't want to like damage his streak right on the field, but the guy, he's just a sweet guy. Like the guy, he's fierce on the field, but when he's out of it, he's just such a caring person that is just difficult to watch him go through this. So obviously we wish him nothing but the best. For all I know, and I think Brian mentioned this is best case scenario. I mean, when he was grabbing that knee, I thought it was an ACL. I thought it was the exact same ACL that he damaged and got worked on when he was at Lanús. That's not the case. The recuperation time is shorter. It's a lot more straightforward to handle. It's not as tricky as an ACL. So just wishing him the best.
And it sounds like he might be back as soon as March, April. Like he's going to miss some time next year, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if he's actually able to participate in preseason, if he's able to do a lot. He's not going to be full in preseason, but he should be able to do some work with the team. I'm sure he will travel with the team. He's going to be involved in the team. This is not a situation where, there's any contemplation of him missing all of next year, which is, frankly, what the concern was if he did his ACL. Like there was, is he gonna play again? And I don't think those are the conversations that they're having right now, which is good. I guess, and this comes at the same time. The positive part of this is not the positive part of this, but it works out that Ryan Kent is getting very close to returning. I don't know if there was an update yesterday, but earlier in the week, Brian basically said he's all in at training. We're not sure if he's going to be available for game 1, but he'll certainly be available for game 2. And he's looked really sharp in training from what I've seen. Was there any new update on that?
I believe he reiterated what you just said, is that it's too soon for game 1, but certainly for beyond that game. And I think that is the case. I have seen him intensify the amount of times he gets into soccer drills, like full-on soccer drills, even scrimmages, which that's kind of when you kind of figure out that the medical staff is starting to give you a little bit more room to have contact and to kick the ball at a certain level, pass the ball at a certain level, explosive plays. And he has looked good. He has looked good. There was a nice little battle between him and Georgie Manungu yesterday that kept going back and forth in a short-sighted game that they had. And it was both of them on the wings, and it was back and forth. He looks like a guy that obviously is aching at getting back on the field. And, that's dangerous. Dangerous as a player, right? I think that really motivates a player. It makes you just that much more willing to deal with things. But what I will say is that the team is not going to risk him. They're definitely going to continue to assess that injury, and that it was a pretty severe tear that he had, and therefore they're not going to just let him loose for no reason. That's why I would preface it any sort of hope that he's more than likely going to be a sub out of the bench that can potentially help you in a situational moment than a guy that's going to obviously start. So the expectation for me is that they can get him ready and fit and in game rhythm for, a max of 30 minutes, let's say.
Right. And frankly, they shouldn't need him to start. I mean, right now, the way it sets up is you got Paul Rothrock on one side, you have Jesus Ferreira on the other, and frankly, you have Georgie Manungu, who is probably still ahead of him on the depth chart when it comes to players coming right off the bench. And so the Sounders are actually set up reasonably well here. They don't need to do anything drastic. And that's with Pedro de la Vega being out, obviously, is that the Sounders still are in good shape, but I think speaks to sort of the work that Brian has been able to do to get multiple players up and ready to play. And, I think Pedro being out lowers the Sounders ceiling, but I still don't think it's out of the question that they could go on a real serious run here.
No, man. I mean, I've been doing some long division about how I was going to put together my bracket and my predictions for moving forward. And I think you're right. I think although the ceiling lowers, the Sounders are a team that is equipped to get far into this tournament. When you add the Brian Smetzer factor of someone who knows how to coach this type of moments, this playoffs, when you talk about what you just mentioned, a collective group of players that can replicate bits and pieces of what Pedro could provide you with, when you have a team that doesn't depend on one person necessarily, right? Without a doubt, Pedro gives you something different. He's an X factor. He stretches defenses. He does things that only he can do. But the goals, the volume of play, it comes from so many different places for the Sounders that if anyone's equipped to be able to not have one of their best players, is the Sounders. So ironically enough, to the way we started this whole show and kind of the dynamic between me and Brian after the presser, I thought that he did such a good job at putting together that lineup for that New York City FC game, particularly because he left Obed and Christian home. And after talking to Obed this week, he looked so refreshed, and he literally said on the record that you don't know how much you need a break until you take a break. And that was just like, whoa. Obed was clearly, he got a heavy load on the Sounders side. He's had a heavy load with the Mexican national team in all parts, right? Both the senior level and the U20 level this year. The competitions for Club World Cup, everything, all of the games, right? He told me this is the most game I've ever played in 1 year. Something that seems to be a recurring answer from quite a few of the Sounders players. So the fact that Brian was able to say, hey, stay home, chill out, disconnect. Look, Obed said, I got to hang out with my family. I didn't come into the facility. I was able to just disconnect. And he just seems like a guy that really needed that. And obviously Christian didn't quite say that. He didn't go so much into it, but I'm sure that with being the leader of minutes for all competitions this year, I think you mentioned last night said that it was over 3,000 minutes. He was probably pretty
Almost
happy to get
3,600 minutes. Yeah, Christian has over 3,600 minutes.
So he was absolutely happy to take a break.
Yeah. And Obed is also like around 3,200 minutes. These guys, and that's without even counting national team minutes. So both these guys have gotten a lot of minutes, and they were able to get a break off this last week. And I think just as important as them getting the week off is I think we were reminded that both Danny Leyva and João Paulo especially, can still do a job. And, I think it's tempting to sort of discount when João Paulo went down with that injury. I think it was very easy to just sort of turn the page and say, all right, well, we don't have him anymore. And one of the things that we were sort of getting on to Craig about at the transfer window is, well, you got to at least get a number 6 backup. You got to bring, because it didn't look like on paper that they had a backup. But now, I don't know that João Paulo is going to be a 90-minute player at any point, but they probably won't need him to be one. And he can absolutely fill in when needed at this point. And that might be just a few minutes at the end of a game. It might be to close out a game. It might be any number of things. But the fact that both him and Danny Leyva showed us twice that they can hold down that double pivot and not really lose a step, I thought was a huge development at the end of the season.
Yeah, no, and look, I also think that he looked, obviously watching the New York City F game a couple of times very closely, I feel like he could have gave you another 10 or 15 minutes in that particular game. Obviously, he comes off because you have that substitution window that you needed to take for Alex. And, obviously, Snyder Burnell does bring fresh legs. But if you needed him to, I feel like he could have gone another 10, 15 minutes. And what I've learned this week is that he has progressively gotten so much stronger physically, right? That he's first you start to get fit, first you start to get ready to inform, you work on your conditioning, then you're strengthening, and he just looks so much stronger. He had 2 goals yesterday, obviously in shorter sided games, but from, I'm thinking, 15, 20 yards, where it was top bin, great shot on Andrew Thomas, who's we all know a phenomenal shot stopper. And man, I was just impressed that he's gathering that sort of power right now. So I really do think that he's progressively getting stronger, fitter, better, and that is a great sign for the Sounders to have that sort of depth. And we've praised Danny Leyva. I think Danny Leyva is a guy that has grown so much from the player that he was 3-4 years ago, and he looks like a guy that can at one point take the role from Obed Vargas when he does make that move to Europe. And maybe that might seem hyperbolic right now because, a lot of people I think still have this stigma about Danny Leyva maybe not being able to handle that role. But no, I think that he is without a doubt a guy that when it comes to his passing, the way he's increased his dynamism on the field, his speed, his recovery, his defense, man, he just looks good.
Yeah, I'm at the point now where I feel totally okay with opening. If the Sounders were to move Obed in the summer or in the winter and start next year with Obed as sort of like the penciled in starter alongside Christian Roldan, I'd have no problem with that. Like, I don't necessarily think, in fact, I hope he would get a serious look there, because I don't know that you can just assume you're going to go out and find a better option unless you're going out and spending huge money, which they don't. It does not look like that they have a huge, they're not going to have an open DP spot. So, at that point you're talking about, something less than that. And I don't know, you can assume that you can just upgrade over Danny. You might, they should probably bring someone else in to bolster the position, but I'm okay with it. I'm at the point now where I really like what I've seen from Danny, and I hope he gets a long look. Are you hearing, what do you think that how does this impact JP's approach for next year? Because I know, after the injury, the assumption was like whether or not he comes back this year, this is probably it for him, and that he might move into coaching. Do you feel like that's still his mindset, or do you think that's one of those things that's just been put aside? We're going to deal with that in the offseason.
I think it's a phenomenal question, because I have just recently being able to hear from sources here and there that as his body continues to progress and get better and stronger, your mindset changes, right? Oh, I can still do this, right? Oh man, I forgot how good I was at this. So I think that that is now in the shelf without a doubt. There's no longer a thought process that I'm for sure going to retire and coach next year. And the current mentality is, let's finish the season, let's see where I'm at physically, and then we'll have a real conversation after that's all said and done. We all know that he has an option for next year, so it's a club option. They have the right to exercise it or not. So I think that they'll have a real conversation with JP, see where he's at. And I think that even if the Sounders don't pick that up, if he feels healthy enough, he might try to go somewhere else, even if it's even if it's around MLS. I don't know if he would go back to Brazil necessarily, but I think he would like to stay in the States.
Yeah, that's interesting. And while we're on the subject, are you hearing anything else about Obed Vargas? And what you did ask him about this the other day, right?
Yeah, I asked him about the whole transfer mill, rumor mill about him having verbal contracts with teams, and he just laughed it off a little bit. And he, as anyone would, he's like, well, I kind of hope that some of it is true, that the interest from Chelsea and Lisboa, man, hopefully that's true. But I'm definitely not talking to nobody, right? I mean, he made that very clear. He said he found it funny. He said he made him chuckle or laugh when he would hear these things from pretty recognized reporters, and he absolutely understands that. A year ago we were talking about rumors from Monterrey and America and some pretty teams around here. Now that has amplified to some of the best teams in Europe. So we'll see where that goes, but I still believe that he is on the path to sign an extension with the Sounders. I don't think that is completely there yet, but I do feel like there is a willingness specifically from him to want to just extend that contract and figure that out. You and I have both mentioned that he's clearly under contract through the end of next year, and although he can have a pre-contract in 6 months after that, which would be in the summer window. And I think he can talk at the beginning of the year with teams, or at least have conversations within a year of the end of his contract. I do believe that he's going to essentially get an extension with the team and then take his time to make the right move to Europe.
Yeah, I suppose that classifies as a positive development in that. It does not quite seem, I still don't have a great sense of the status of Paul Rothrock's contract. I would imagine at this point everyone is moving into, we're going to play this out and see where it goes, because if he goes off in the playoffs, his market value is just going to be higher. That's the reality of it. And the Sounders, it sounds like, though, what's happened right now, best I can tell, is that the two camps have sort of gone to their separate sides and they've said, this is what we're offering. And this is what, Paul's side has said, this is what we are asking for. The Sounders have said, this is what we're offering. And if we, we'll revisit this, I suppose, in the offseason. But right now, the way it looks is that there probably won't be a deal made before the end of the season. And he is going to go into free agency. Maybe he comes back, maybe he doesn't. But it also seems like Ryan Kent is a very viable fallback option if things don't work out. And maybe not at the number that Ryan Kent is at right now, probably at a lower number. But that sort of seems to be the situation. Is that kind of what you're hearing as well?
That is exactly what I'm hearing. And actually, I think that with this Pedro de la Vega injury, you might think, well, that might help the case. But I really, as a guy who really enjoys Paul Rothrock and Sounder Paul Rothrock, because I want to make that very clear. I think that right now he's in a system, he's in a community, in a place where he can absolutely excel and continue to play well, which is not a guarantee if you leave the team. So as somebody who really enjoys him as a person, as an athlete. I am afraid that he's going to play himself out of the reach of the Sounders. And let me just try to explain that. If he goes out here in the playoffs, has a couple of goals, a couple of great moments, some assists, some of that primetime poly type of games, he's only going to want to keep that number that he's currently trying to get out of the team there or higher. I mean, I don't know. And
Right.
you and I know that the Sounders have a very clear line of how much they're willing to pay for Paul Rothrock, regardless of how good he could be. So to me, this situation might just make it harder because you would understand Paul for saying, look what I just did for you guys. So it's either this number or I'm outie. And the Sounders might be forced to just say, look, we love to have you back, but we just can't do it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think, and that's a reality that I think we at least need to be prepared for as happening, even if it's not what any of us would prefer. And, I can't really blame Rothrock. This is the reality, is that this is probably his best chance to get paid in his career. And he, and I don't know how far apart the two sides are. I get this feeling it's not particularly close, or else they would just kind of figure out a way to bridge that gap. I think they are
not close.
Yeah, I think they're probably closer to like $300,000 or $400,000 apart, and that gets to be a hard gap to close. And we'll see what happens. Hopefully, there is some workable range in there, but we'll see. If Paul wants to test himself on the free agency, I support that. I can't blame him. The reality is the Sounders got him at a way, way, way below market value.
Mm-hmm.
And he bet on himself. And this is the spoils. When you bet on yourself, you get to actually collect sometimes. So anyway, any other outstanding issues as we go? It's too bad that some of this stuff is hanging over, but I don't get the sense that it's a distraction. Which I think speaks to the environment that the Sounders have created. I heard one podcast say that it's going to be devastating for the Sounders to lose Pedro de la Vega. I don't get that sense, at least from an emotional standpoint. Everyone feels really bad for Pedro, but at this point, they've dealt with so many injuries. I don't think an injury to Pedro de la Vega is going to shake the club up in any meaningful way. He's going to be missed. Everyone feels bad for him, but there's not this woe is us type of atmosphere. Similarly, there's a lot of situations we're seeing maybe this is a little different, but there's a lot of situations where a Paul Rothrock contract situation could become a distraction. But I don't get the sense that I don't get the sense Paul's even really worried about it. He's aware of it and he's handling it. And I actually thought I really respected how articulate he was in talking about it when he was asked about it after the RSL game. And he basically said, look, it's tough to be playing with this over your head, but I've worked through it. I appreciate the coaches helping me work through it. And it seems like it's not being a distraction. And I just think that the Sounders, that's another reason I think I'm really bullish about their potential, is because they have fostered a locker room that they can have disagreements. It's funny. I was just thinking about this the other day. They had this situation right before the Club World Cup where the players had this on-field protest, and Adrian yells at the players, and we had this whole thing about it. And it felt like that was maybe going to be this huge distraction that derails the whole season. Turns out it was like a 2-week thing, and then it was over, and everyone got on with their life, and they moved on. And it has, we barely even thought about it since then.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think that there are even individual motivating factors that impulse what you just mentioned. I mean, if we look around this team, and I kind of asked Jordan Morris about, whether or not this team feels a little bit like it could go on a run in a similar way that the 2019 team did, where everybody was talking about LAFC and Carlos Vela and that incredible team. And even when they got to that final, nobody really gave him a shot. And he even talked about the 2016 team and the way kind of they walked into that specific playoff, and then they were cemented as a team, and they went through everything. But to me, when I look around this team, there are so many individual reasons why they're going to play with a chip on their shoulder, that it makes it dangerous. So you just talked about Paul Rothrock. Paul Rothrock's taking this whole negotiation the right way, which is, look, I'm on a lock in. And if I want to prove that I'm worth this, I got to play the best. I got to be out there and just put in just pain on a defense, right? So that's the way he's going to play. Jordan Morris is a guy that just told us that, look, he's focused on just getting ready, continue to score, and maybe at some point getting himself back into the talks of the UN Spence national team. So he's motivated. Albert Rusnak has played motivated all season. This is as dynamic and I don't know, like, there's almost a role of sacrifice that he's doing on the field that I wasn't accustomed to when he came to Albert Rusnak. Always been a good player, always technical, always a guy that can perform and hit the stat sheet. But those other things about covering space and making certain runs, he wasn't really doing it. This year he's doing it. Jesus Ferreira, he's all the scrutiny that he has. He's motivated to get into this playoffs and just tear it up and make a name for himself and show everybody, whoever doubted him for his talents, show Dallas that he was worth being here. So there's so many individual components here, all the way to Obed, right? We don't need to talk about why he'd be motivated, or Christian, why he's motivated to make the U.S. national team. It's everywhere. It's Stephen Fry on his maybe last run with his team, or saying, hey, maybe it's not my last run. Maybe I could prove that I still got it. I mean, everyone on that team is individually motivated. And that's what finally made me put him in the bracket past San Diego. So we'll see if that works out. We'll see where that goes. But I do agree with you that there is something about this team that could ignite, turn into fire, and maybe they go really far.
Yeah, and it's interesting because all of these situations, I look at an Albert where I don't know where that motivation is necessarily coming from, other than himself, like other than saying like, no, this is my standard that I'm holding myself to. There's no contract waiting out there. It's almost like he's proving that he doesn't need a contract. Like, I actually think he made a comment about that. I think he was being interviewed on the Zach Awani and Brad Evans podcast, and he said something about how, like, everyone was saying I was just playing for a contract, and I'm having another good year, which shows that it wasn't just, and almost like that's a weird way to motivate yourself, like that I don't need to be playing for a contract, but hey, whatever gets you going. But I would agree with you that Albert seems to be playing with a different level of sort of intensity and fire. And it might be something as simple as these guys like playing with each other, and they enjoy, and that does seem like, not to be fair, too much of a booster or whatever, but it does seem like these guys enjoy one another's company. There is, like, the kind of internal fighting that you have, you just aren't seeing it. Like, there were times where there was real, like, camps within the team, and I'm obviously guys are better friends with the other guys, but I don't get the sense that they are in these little cliques. Like, I was hearing, like, the other day that Jesus plays like whatever online game they're playing, but he's like playing with Stu Hawkins, and he's playing with Snyder Brunell, and he's playing with, like, and it's like this bridge of generations, a bridge of backgrounds. It's like there's not this like one common thing. It's not like it's Christian, Alex, and Jordan hanging out from everybody else, and whatever. Like, it just seems like everyone gets along, and I don't know. I like this. It's been a fun team to cover, I guess is what I'm saying, in part because they seem to not be looking to stab each other in the back or kind of come up with their own little narratives.
Yeah, everybody seems on the same page, and even little things like that little golf area they have where we do the interviews, and everybody just seems to try to golf into like a, I don't know, laundry bin.
Bucket,
looks like,
lawn
so
golf.
all those things, I think the team has done a really good job at doing that. Like, all jokes aside, because there's been a lot of jokes made about Steven Leinhart, I think that he's a guy that's really worked with a lot of these guys. He's worked with Jordan Morris, worked with Alex, worked with Paul Arriola with his whole injury, worked with Pedro de la Vega, right? I mean, he's a guy that has really brought a lot of that, I don't know, unity type of thing. He comes around and jokes with people, and he's this heavy-handed dude that even shakes Mad Winter huge body. You know, I mean, he just seems like there's a different vibe that's very positive around the clubhouse.
Yeah. Well, I think we should take a break here. We're going to come back and we're going to get a little bit more into this playoff series. We're going to give some predictions and we'll break it down a little bit more. You're listening to Nos Arietes. Thank you for listening to the Sounder at Heart podcast network, which now includes Nos Arietes, Lobbing Scorchers, and the Cooler Guild. Although this podcast is free, it's only made possible through our paid subscribers. Plans start as low as $30 a year and allow us to remain independent and mostly ad-free. Subscribers get access to all our written and podcast content, including a full-text RSS feed and a mostly ad-free podcast feed that includes every show in one spot. If you really like what we're doing, though, I'd encourage you to sign up at our higher tiers, which include all sorts of various perks. The most popular of those is our members-only Discord, where the real Sounders sickos hang out. I know I've called this group the smartest, funniest, and best-informed Sounders fans in the world, but it's more than the rough equivalent of a Sounders Mensa meeting. Discord is where we make things happen, like for real. You know the promotion the Sounders ran that offered fans the opportunity to trade in their Messi jersey for a Paul Rothrock one? That originated in our community. You'll not only be the first to know about stuff, but you also have a semi-direct line to the movers and shakers at the Sounders organization. If you want to be one of the totally normal people who occupy the Sounder at Heart Discord, just become a supporter of Sounder at Heart. Anyway, thanks for listening and go Durs. Nos Arietes, admittedly, is not exactly known for our spicy takes, but that doesn't mean we want our food to be mild. Spice up your life with Hacks and Ferments. Handcrafted in Georgetown and made with the best local ingredients from across the Pacific Northwest, they specialize in unique small batch fermented hot sauces and vinegars. Hacks and Ferments brings bold flavors and natural fermentation together for something truly special. Whether you're a heat seeker or just looking to elevate your cooking, you'll find something you love at hacksandferments.com. That's HAXANFERMENTS.com. And right now, if you use the code Sounder at Heart, that's all one word, at checkout, you will get a free hot sauce with your order. Again, go to hacksandferments.com, use the code Sounder at Heart at checkout for a free hot sauce with your order. Hacks and Ferments is a proud sponsor of the Sounder at Heart podcast network. Welcome back to Nos Arietes on the Sounder at Heart podcast network. All right, so let's dig into this. We have Minnesota United coming up on Monday. Game 1 is on Monday. Game 2 is the following Monday. And then a potential game 3 would be way out in November 8th, something like that, on a Saturday. So, but let's dial in, look at Minnesota United. This is a team who was flirting with the top spot in the West for most of the year and then stumbled a bit in the last few weeks of the season. They were into the U.S. Open Cup semifinals. They lost at home, even though with a chance to host the Open Cup that would have been their first ever trophy. They are, weirdly enough, there's only 3 teams in MLS that have never won a trophy: San Diego, Minnesota, and one other. And I was shocked. St. Louis. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you would think that such a young, like, there's all these new teams, but the Whitecaps have won Canadian championships. Montreal has won Canadian championships. So there's all these teams where you're like, oh, well, what did they ever win? And it's like, Dallas has won Supporter Shields. New England won a, what was it called? The Superliga. So it's like, there's all these teams that are like, oh, okay. I guess that's like, everyone has gotten their piece. Anyway, Minnesota is out there looking for their first trophy. And I think they probably believe that this could be it, but their struggles have not come out of nowhere. This is a team who never really wanted the ball. They set an MLS record for the least amount of possession over the course of the season. They're the first team to ever have less than 40% of possession throughout the year, which is crazy. But they're really good on set pieces. But I think part of what happened down the stretch is teams started to get a little more wise to their game model, but also they transferred their most effective offensive player, Antoni Oluwaseyi, and so then they lost Kelvin Yaboa to an injury right before, like at the same time. And so now they're sort of like having to make do with guys at the number 9 who are not, like Robin Lod has been playing number 9 a lot. What's your read on Minnesota United?
I think you're absolutely right. I believe that a team that plays with such a small margin of errors because of the way they play, they're going to absorb a lot of pressure. They're going to be prolific defensively, and they're going to be effective on set pieces. Once you start losing some of the tools that were making that work, it can become difficult to maintain that sort of success rate. So I think Tani was a guy that was so important for what they did, specifically on transition moments. Jabot was a guy that had been on a, I think I want to say it was almost a month and a half of an injury. He's back though. He played 20-ish minutes against the LA Galaxy, looked good. So that's something that Seattle might have to deal with. Clearly, this team depends a lot of what Joaquin Pereira does. Joaquin Pereira has been so good that he actually just a couple hours ago got a contract extension through 2028 with an option to 2029. He's had 7 goals and 17 assists in 1.5 years with Minnesota. He's been unbelievable. He's a guy that even Brian mentioned just yesterday because he's so good on set pieces as well. So they are a team that has, and I think they would even admit this, they have dropped maybe a level or two to where they were at 2-3 months ago. So this is not the exact same team that beat Seattle twice. I mean, it's completely different. The way they have their defense set up right now in personnel, the way that they have their attack set up in personnel, and just their lack of form. If you look at the last games, this team has really struggled to do what it is that they do right? On set pieces, on everything. So I think that Seattle's playing him at the right time, but I do not want to underestimate what this team can do in Minnesota. I asked Brian yesterday, look, you can only control the controllables, but although set pieces, when you do have a lot of control of things, it seems like they still are able to be effective there. And he said, look, the way we can control the controllables is not doing stupid fouls on top of the 18, keeping the ball within the lines, narrowing the field a little bit and not having all of this opportunities for them to do long throw-ins on. So Brian is very aware of what he needs to do to limit this team. And they've also have been working on playing with 2 forwards, which is something that they've done seldomly throughout the season. It's not something that they always do, but that it might be necessary to break down a 5-man backline when they are so deep. And instead of 3, it is 5 guys back there just trying to get rid of the ball, trying to clear, trying to intercept. So, do you see a moment where is Danny and Jordan up there? Or, is it Danny and Osase when Jordan has come off, or something to that degree where, whether it is a starting formation or a second half tactic, I believe that Seattle's doing the right things to be prepared for a good Minnesota team that, as I mentioned, has kind of lost a step or two.
Right. And, the one of the things that Brian also mentioned in that conversation about going with 2 forwards is that it's not as easy as like, well, you just put 2 forwards on there. It's like, well, you got to take somebody off. And where are you going to sacrifice that position? Are you going to pull off, are you going to pull off a central midfielder? Are you going to have, like you can talk yourself into a situation where it makes sense to have a Christian and Albert out there together. But then does that mean you're pulling off Obed? Are you sacrificing a winger? So there's all these things that you have to sort of like work out. And it's not, and so that's part of why I don't think we're going to see a 2 forward set at the beginning. But
totally
like you said, it makes sense that if you're chasing a goal, especially late, why not? Why not throw another body in there? And it's going to be really interesting to see how Minnesota handles the Yeboah situation, because like you said, he has come back, but is he ready to start? If he starts, they're probably going back to the 5-2-3 that they have essentially played the whole time. But if he's not able to start, that probably means they're going into a 4-4-2, which is what they've done the last 2 weeks. And with the way they've done that is they've had Pereira and Lod as the two nominal strikers, and it's a very different look. And it would be very different than what the Sounders faced the last time they were there. And again, that's another reason why the Sounders don't want to overthink this with their formation, is that you put out the roster that you feel like gives you the best chance for what you want to do, not reacting to what Minnesota might do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, I was watching that LA Galaxy Minnesota game, and I still think that regardless of whether, Jaboa is 100% or not, or ready for 45 or not, this team depends on the defense. And I don't know why I felt specifically in the LA Galaxy game like there was just oddly or uncharacteristically gappy, and there was a lot of pockets in between the lines that they usually don't have, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was, but I think that because of injuries, they had to push Rosales up to play more of a midfielder role, which he does, and he's done well. But Rosales, I thought, was a huge component of why the defense was so solid when he played that wingback position, rather than Marchnik, who's right now the guy that's running that role. So I think those little things, those little changes that have happened in Minnesota are huge for a team that depends so much on their defensive presence and discipline. So that's why I feel cautiously, I don't want to get anybody too excited about it, but I feel confident that Seattle, even in game one, can go out there, put this Minnesota team in distress, really pin him back, and find a way to get Jordan into a particular space and put the ball away, or a mid-range shot, which I think is going to be one of the things that they're going to want to do a little bit more of to kind of push those center backs forward, is the threat of a mid-range shot. And Albert Rusnak has looked really good all week when it comes to his long distance and mid-range shots. So there's going to have to be a lot of that. But I thought that Nacimiento and Pencil had a lot of room to run into in this particular game. So obviously they're going to change things up. They're going to be more ready and more on for this Sounders game, but they needed that game against the Galaxy. So that's where I kind of lay the line of, I feel pretty comfortable saying that the Sounders, although underdogs in the odds, I feel like they, in my mind, should be able to get this result.
And it's not, here's a funny little stat. Minnesota actually had a better away record than home record this year. They weren't bad either place. They were exceptional on the road. Frankly, they were 8-3-6 on the road, but just 8-5-4 at home. So this is a really good opportunity, I think, for the Sounders to get out and get off to a good start. I will say that Dane St. Clair, if this goes to penalties, Dane St. Clair gives them a pretty big advantage. He is having an amazing year. He's saved 2 of the 4 penalties that he's only given up one of the 2. Sorry. He's opposing teams are 2 for 4 against him. He's saved 1. There was a miss in the other one, but he's very good in penalties. I believe he won at least 1, if not 2 shootouts in last year's playoffs when they pulled the upset in the first round. He is a very good goalkeeper. I do not think getting to penalties is a good strategy for the Sounders.
No. And if it is, may I say that I am completely on board on saving one substitution to bring in Andrew Thomas. And that's no disrespect to Stephen Fry, but I would like, and I think Brian has dabbled with the idea that if there was a time to go to PKs, that he'd be a guy that jumps in. So that'd be interesting. But to your point, additionally to St. Clair, who I think by all accounts is everybody's goalkeeper of the year in MLS this year.
Yeah.
Michael Boxall is also another guy that was not part of the LA Galaxy game and who is outstanding. He's in my starting 11 for the MLS of all MLS. So I think that he is without a doubt a guy that not just does the defending and the physical part, and he's so good in aerial duels, but he's the guy controlling traffic. He's the guy that probably prevents those gaps from opening. Very smart player. Had the chance to talk to him when he was here with the Sounders, and he's a nose to the ground, I'm going to work my head off type of defender. And that's another guy that I think you're going to have to keep on your bingo card of why the Minnesota United team can create some challenges for the Sounders.
Absolutely. And yeah, I looked this up. He did win 2 shootouts in the first round upset of RSL last year. So anyway, this is a dangerous team. I don't want to get too wrapped up in overlooking them because this is a good matchup. It. I think that we're as confident as we are speaks to more how we feel about the Sounders than overlooking Minnesota. This is a team that is very capable of winning this. It would not be an upset in any way for Minnesota to win this. That said, I want to do a little exercise with you and look ahead and basically ask you 2 different questions. And we'll start with this one. If the Sounders go on to MLS Cup, what do you think they're going to be doing well that gets them, or who do you think is going to be kind of driving that bus?
Man, that is a phenomenal question. And I think by all accounts, and with my confidence of the volume of play and the creativity and chances that this team can get, I would say that if this team goes on a run, it's because Jordan Morris is on a heater, because Jordan Morris has found that edge, that moment, that fire to just see clearly in the final third, and he's being composed and clinical, and he's getting to every single ball that Paul Rothrock puts in or Ferreira puts in. We've seen him get so consistently into positions, and we talked to him about this week. That was my question to him, right? Is with this system that gives you so many opportunities, I mean, it's a striker's dream. So I believe that if Jordan Morris is spot on and can find himself to be the striker that I think we all think he can be, that's a big reason why the Sounders would move on from Minnesota, a team that drops deep, that's going to absorb a lot of pressure, and that you need to be able to break down. And even against teams like San Diego, where if they're pressing high and they're pushing forward, obviously making the assumption that that's who you face next round, I think that Jordan Morris is a guy that's going to be able to break down a lot of teams. And with the lack of Pedro Vega, of course, he's a guy that could really put some pressure on defenses and create a lot of opportunities for Seattle.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good shout. I'll add that I think that if there is a sort of potential X factor that is someone who has not produced big numbers, but who I think is very capable of doing it, is Jesus Ferreira. I still think has some real numbers in him. You know, he has been a player who I think has played better than if you just look at his counting stats, you're going to say, what's the big deal here? He hasn't really done that much. But if you actually watch the games and you look at the influence that he has, he has been so good this year, much better than I think, a different kind of player than I really thought the Sounders were going to be getting. And someone who I think has the potential to sort of step his game up a little bit and be a kind of an X factor for the Sounders. And then on the flip side, though, I want to ask you, if the Sounders fall short, what do you think what's the Achilles heel that you are going to be watching that you think has to be of some concern for them?
Soft goals, just a defensive moments where they turn off. And this is something that has been a concern, and it has been something that Brian and this coaching staff have tried to eradicate, but they have not been able to, right? It's a small, quick restart where players are on the wrong side of the ball. It's a bad giveaway in the midfield or in the back line that creates an easy opportunity. So for me, it's just soft goals. And it comes in so many potential ways. So for me, this Sounders team has to play with the intensity that they played that Leagues Cup with, where they were on 90 minutes and there was intensity all around, and they were never distracted or felt like the game was won, and they were battling every single minute of every single game. So that's the key. That's the key. And that's what essentially, in my opinion, if the Sounders do not go through the first round, or if they do not go through in the second round, it would have to do with a team that, because they have been so aggressive offensively, at times they do expose themselves and they allow themselves to be vulnerable in certain parts of the field. But it goes to the mentality mainly. It's not about the system. It's more about just easy moments where you're just not concentrated in the pass ahead, in the communication with the guy that's covering your space. All those things are what I think would be Seattle's Achilles heel in the playoffs.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. And I think one of the interesting contrasts is you look at last year, and they did have, this penchant for giving up late goals has sort of been a thing that's been going on since last year, but it's very different. Last year, the goals that they gave up late were almost always the result of them being in a position where they were holding on for dear life, and the dam finally broke at the end. On some level, you just, there was an inevitability to the late goals that they allowed last year. They didn't allow a lot of goals, but the ones that they did, especially the ones that were late, were almost always coming when they were down a man, or they were, they just had lost control of the game. What's been so frustrating this year is the late goals they've allowed oftentimes have come from like positions of strength, like in games where it seems like they have it all put together and they are pushing for a winner or whatever. And you can go back and you can look at the Galaxy game. You can look at the Austin game. You can look at the Atlanta game. You can even go back to the first game of the season, the Charlotte. At no point, all four of those games, they looked like they were absolutely in control for most of it. I think it's about the Austin game. And if you had told me 10 minutes left to go, which team is more likely to find a winner, for sure I would have told you the Sounders. They were all over them. And to your point, it's these lapses of concentration where it's just like they almost convince themselves they've got the game under control, and something happens and they lose it. The Galaxy, the goal they gave up to Galaxy might be the single most frustrating goal that they've allowed all year, because they had no business not getting 3 points in that game. And yet here they were at the end of that game, allowing a just absolutely laughably easy chance for a team that had no business creating. So I'm with you. I think that if they fall apart, if they fall short, it's almost certainly going to be something like this.
Yeah. And look, it's a good indicator that against New York City FC, they gave up an easy goal, and one that you could absolutely put in a template of the type of goals they've given up this season, because Paul Rothrock rushes to take a quick free kick that he has no business having to go quick on because you're up 1-0, and then drops it back. It makes it easy for the repress of New York City. That creates a moment for them, and there's an equalizer. But then they're able to get it back, and then when they get the goal back, then they become a lot more patient on the ball. And patience is one thing that this team at time lacks, and that's another thing that I think Ferreira does so well. If there's a guy on the field that gives this team pause and composure is Ferreira. He's not going to go crazy forward. He's going to take a second, maybe drop the ball back. He'll ask for it back and then consider a better pass or switch the point of attack. And I think that's what Seattle needs to do, is understand certain points of the game where it's better to control the ball and be patient with it than just to get forward and try to get a third goal on a 2-1 scoreline. And instead of going for the third, maybe just keeping possession to hold on to that 2-1.
And it's funny because I think at some point they sort of convince themselves that, and this isn't wrong, but I do think that it speaks to the mentality, is that at some point they convince themselves that it's almost better to get that extra goal than it is to just control the game and sort of choke out your opponent. And I appreciate the aggressiveness, and it has worked at times. But I just think that maybe they need to be a little bit more confident in their ability to hold the lead rather than expand, feel like they need to expand the lead, especially once you get past a certain point in the game. All right. So you have alluded to this a few times, and I would feel like we'd be doing ourselves or our listeners an injustice if we didn't go through your bracket. You clearly have put some time and thought into assembling your bracket. Let's start in the West. Who do you got going through? And if the Sounders are going to get to MLS Cup, what's the path look like?
The path so far is Sounders and Vancouver, which if you're looking at a bracket would allow you to see that I have obviously San Diego winning their first game. Then facing the Sounders beat them. And on the other side of the bracket, Vancouver would win their first game, then face LAFC in what should be a phenomenal game. But there's something about Vancouver that I just think puts in my head, to me, when it comes to the playoffs, because there's such a balanced team. As much as I know that the firepower is on the side of LAFC and those two monsters that are Buanga and Son, the overall balance of that midfield that Kubas and Berhalter provide for Vancouver, the depth and circumstantial tools that they have, bringing in a guy like Jaden Nelson, I think electricity and amplifier that Thomas Mueller has been, the possibility that you get a guy like Whiteback at some point, and even if you don't, I think that they've been able to score
back at the start of the playoffs too.
Blackman as well. I just think that as this tournament progresses, they're going to get some pretty important pieces back. And even if those guys are not 100%, this team has been so consistent. They've only lost one game out of the last 10 in all competitions. I think Jason Gasper.
Jesper Sorensen.
Jesper Sorensen. Jeez, I don't know where that went. Jesper Sorensen, who's a guy that I've been praising since CONCACAF Cup, has been so good at getting these guys ready for the big moments that, aside from that final that they had against Cruz Azul. Azul. That's the only time where I felt like the team came short, and they had a lot of absences, including Sebastian Berhalter, who didn't play that game. So for me, when it comes to the coaching, when it comes to the concepts, when it comes to the identity, when it comes to the depth and those spark plugs coming off the bench, and just the overall collective play, I think Vancouver is the better team, and that's why I have them facing the Sounders at the Western Conference Final, and then the Sounders unfortunately falling short to Vancouver, and Vancouver goes to win the cup. That's what I have in my bracket.
I'll tell you this: sign me up if you can guarantee that the Sounders get to play at Vancouver in the conference finals. Sign me up. I'll take my chances with that. I feel like that would be a lot of fun. It would be the highest profile meeting between the Sounders and Whitecaps in and I always like to say this, the longest history in North American soccer is between the Whitecaps and Sounders. And it would be very nice to get to see a conference final between those. Who do you have coming out of the East, though?
In the East, I have... And this is where I kind of had my issues, was more in the East than in the West, which just seemed much more clear cut.
It seems more open. Yeah,
because Philadelphia is a team that, although the underlying numbers and the fact that they face certain teams hasn't quite been there, was a team that I was really pushing for them getting to the final, but I ended up simmering down on Cincinnati having too much talent and getting too many guys back. Arjano has been in practice already. Denke is a guy that should be ready, but I don't know if in this first game, but in the playoffs, he will be back. I think Brennan has done a phenomenal job, and the magic of Evander and what this team can do, I feel like it's enough to get them through the East. So those are the two teams that I kind of was tiddling with, but I ended up just sitting with Cincinnati. But my East is very interesting because I got Nashville bidding Inter Miami, and if Nashville kind of gets on a heater, they could also get pretty far. I do like that Nashville team. I like what BJ has done. I love that duo of Mukhtar and Sam Surridge. So yeah, that's kind of what I have. I have Cincinnati facing Vancouver in the final, and Vancouver getting the best out of Cincinnati.
Wow. That would definitely be an interesting final. No question about that. Well, yeah, I think that the East is the general consensus seems to be around. There are 5 teams in the West who all look pretty good, and there are 7 teams probably in the East who are, you could see them making a run. But you've got almost chalk there with Cincinnati as the number 2 seed. And I got to say, there's a lot of reason to like Cincinnati, namely Evander and Kevin Denke. They have a defense that looks like it's an MLS Cup worthy defense. I would not be at all surprised to see Cincinnati put it together. I think the only thing that gives me pause about Cincinnati is that they've just not been able to sort of like put it all together this year, even with all the talent that they have, with all the it always feels like they are a little shy of, being as good as the sum of their parts. And, we'll see. I like a lot of the talent they have. It should be an interesting playoffs. I'm actually really excited about this playoffs. I feel like there are, like I said, there's probably 12 teams who I think all look pretty good on paper. And that's an exciting place to be, because there's a lot of years where it's like, I don't know if I like any of these teams.
Yeah, look, and I almost go even more chalk because, again, the other team that I had a hard time letting go of was Philadelphia because, again, they haven't beat the big teams in the East. And I'm not so concerned about them winning the Shield, but I really like Cornell as a coach. And I think that if there's someone that's going to make your life a living hell in a playoff game, is Cornell, regardless of whether he was there with St. Louis with a much worse team, of course, or a lesser team. But in this one, when I look at the pieces there for Philadelphia, they got the pieces of a winning team, right? You look at Glesnes, he's contender for Defender of the Year. You got Kai Wagner, same thing. You got Andrew Blake. He's a guy that he's a proven goalkeeper. Ura is a guy that's kind of revived his career this time around. He couldn't find a goal when he first got there. Now he's kind of getting them. Ilowski is a guy that's a proven goal scorer. You still got Baribo, who was on a heater earlier this season. I like Jesus Bueno in the midfield. I think he's very underrated. So this team has some components. And I get, losing Sullivan to that, I think it's an ACL, was bad for the team, but I still feel like they have a lot of components that can make them a good playoff team. But again, I'm sticking with Cincinnati. I did a lot of thinking, and that's what I'm going to go ahead and stick with.
Sounds good. Well, Niko, as always, it was a pleasure having you on What We Learned This Week. I think we have learned a lot of things this week. And other than that, we will probably be back on next. I don't think we have another show coming out before the game on Monday. So we'll probably just be doing lots of recap after that. But of course, follow Sounder at Heart. We'll have any late breaking news and preview content on there as well. With all that said, I am Jeremiah O'Shan. Oh, you know what I should also say? Follow Niko on Blue Sky, El Rolo NW. Make sure you're following Pulso Sports. They just have a great interview in there with Obed Vargas, as well as most of the post-practice interview sessions. Of course, listen to him on Loving Scorches. He and I just did an episode last night where we gave out the lobbies, I think they called them, the various awards. But with all that said, I am Jeremiah O'Shan signing off for Nos Arietes, which is part of the Sounder at Heart podcast network. We will catch you next time.
let's go f***ing Sounders.